telling you about ancient literature, and I don't show it to you. So what I did is, if you notice, and we'll see this chart. This is from another class I taught before, and the point is that this is, this class is the bibliographical, the historical proof of the New Testament, and the canon, and the study of the ancient literature around it. The last class that I teach is ancient works, and religious works. And the reason I teach it is because, the reason I teach at the end is because if you look at the religious works, and we'll look at them in detail, you'll see, we'll compare them using the bibliographical and the internal-external tests and see how they work. So I hope you enjoy this class because, like I said, I keep promising you that I'll show you the literature, and actually I have examples, and I chose the most lucid examples. Just so you know, I didn't handpick stuff that is nutso, but you can judge for yourself and see. And so we'll look at each of the, and this isn't about the religions per se, it's about the religious documents they have, ancient religious documents. Go to sleep. Wake up. Next slide. All right. So these are the religious works. So the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Zoroastrism, the Zend-Avesta, the Pahlavi text, Shintoism. We'll go through each of these. Hinduism. We won't go through them in as much detail as it appears, but we'll look at the Buddhism, the Sutras, the Lotus Sutra, Jainism. And I'll explain some of these to you. You may not know what these religions are. These are the classic world religions. Confucianism, Taoism, Islam, Sikhism, Baha'i, Mormonism. And this is the list. This is the list I gave you. Remember, the bibliographical tests are how many do we have? The how many do we have allows us to know whether we have an accurate transmission. We look at how many do we have, and we look at the span of the documents. And what I did for comparison, remember the New Testament passes all the bibliographical tests really well. The Old Testament has issues, right? And so because of this comparison, let's see, I didn't put any of the New Testament stuff in. I left the Old Testament because it is, as I said, it has issues because it's the worst case bibliographically, not so much internally and externally. But remember, and we already looked at it. Remember Torah class? Okay, Torah class, 2 years, what we did. We looked at Torah class of veracity. And so this Old Testament Dead Sea Scrolls, 16 fragments. The Old Testament Masoretic text, we have over 4,000 copies. But the span is 2,400 years. There's about 1,350 for the Old Testament. And then we have the Septuagint. The span for the Septuagint is about 600 years. And earliest written, etc., etc. So this gives you a good comparison to other religious documents in history. Because, like I said, the Old Testament has issues. New Testament has no problems at all. New Testament passes. If you're going to read Pliny or Sophocles or Caesar or anything in antiquity, you better be reading the New Testament first because it beats them all hands down. Old Testament, like I said, is a little bit different. So, Egyptian Book of the Dead. It is a collection of hymns and spells for the dead. For the dead. You got to be dead to use them. And here's an example. A hymn of praise to Ra when he riseth in the eastern part of the heaven. Behold Osiris on, described and recordeth the holy offerings of all the gods, who saith, Homage to thee, O thou, who hast come as Kephera, the creator of the gods. Thou risest, thou shinest, making bright thy mother knew it, crown king of the gods, thy mother knew it, doth homage to thee, etc., etc., etc. It's basically a hymn. This is one of the hymns, a precursor to the spells. Let me see, I may have it goes on and on and on. If you want to see the spells, you can do it. I've got a copy of the Book of the Dead. The problem with the Book of the Dead, here's bibliographical. We have 4 known different versions. There are 5 manuscripts of one version. Each one is incomplete of the other 3, plus the numerous fragments. In other words, we find these usually in mummies. And the problem is that with mummies, the mummies do pretty well for time, but the documents don't.
But the daddies aren't as good.
What's that?
But the daddies aren't as good.
Yeah. The document changed with each dynasty. We can see that there's an unknown gap between the earliest manuscript and the extant manuscripts. By the way, using a bibliographical test is meaningless because the documents are different. And history is not important in the Egyptian theology. They are hymns and spells when you're dead. So we go to the internal test. This is a bibliographical test. The bibliographical test tells us, number one, we have 9. We have 9 copies total, right? Which is not too bad, except they're all different, and that is bad. So that's a problem. The internal test. There are many internal differences. The work is not cohesive or comprehensible. I mean, unless you're doing poetry or hymns to Nut and to Osiris or to Ra, then you're probably going to have a little issue. The degree of witness, there is no degree of witness, right? A degree of witness is an eyewitness. Okay, was someone an eyewitness to the spells for the dead? Nobody claims that, right? Was someone eyewitness for the hymns to Ra? Well, somebody wrote it. But what is a poetry? It's fiction. It's poetry, right? So there's no degree of witness. I mean, this is tertiary, quadritiary at worst.
What would you witness anyway?
You'd have to be
You
dead.
witness the
Yeah.
writing, or you witness that it works?
Yeah, I mean, exactly, like,
Yeah, and how do you know, right? I'm dead. It worked. Oh, that's bad. Yeah. Anyway, they are geographically placed. Chronologically, we don't know. We have no idea. Chronologically placed, which dynasty, right? They kind of trace from dynasty to dynasty, but we have no idea. It's impossible to know. But the document doesn't claim to be history. There it is right there, right? If a document claims to be history, then we can use bibliographical internal tests, right? But if it doesn't claim to be history, I mean, for example, does Oliver Twist claim to be history? No, we can gain some history from it, but it doesn't claim to be history, right? Does Longfellow claim to be history? Or Frost? Frost is even better. Does Frost claim to be history, right? No, poetry, right? Shakespeare's poems don't claim to be history. There is a little bit maybe of some things you can pull out of it, but they don't claim to be history, right? And don't base English history on Shakespeare. Although there is some in there, you'll probably fail. So yeah, they don't claim to be history. They claim to be hymns and spells. So that's pretty simple. External tests, comparison to other works in the region of time. Since work is not a history, it's not possible to make these comparisons. You just can't do it. It's impossible. Does not support any historical claims. Does not support any. It does support the ritual claims. That is those done by the living. So if you're a living person, yeah, they did some of these rituals. Some of the rituals for the dead, they kind of encapsulated some of that. You know what I'm talking about, right? The Ankh. You guys know what the Ankh is, right? Open my mouth and I shall see. What is that the famous morning prayer? Open my mouth, O Lord, and I shall proclaim your praise. That is from a Egyptian hymn where the priest cuts open the mummy's mouth with an ankh, with a cutting ankh. And that is almost a direct quote out of one of the Book of the Dead or some of the Egyptian hymns. So anyway, it does support ritual claims, but whatever. But those are accomplished by living people because we can't know what the dead are doing. There's similar problems with most ancient religious works, which we will see. I picked the English. Why do you think I picked the Egyptian Book of the Dead? It's about the oldest. Actually, the oldest of the oldest is the Old Testament. We will not see anything quite older than that, except for maybe the Confucian documents. But the oldest is the Old Testament, pretty much. The Egyptian Book of the Dead in that era, in that point, it's pretty close. Now, Zoroastrianism. Let's move on to Zoroastrianism. Persian monotheism, I should have said when these were done, when these were made up, right, or when they were created. Zoroastrianism is not modern. It's a Persian Empire kind of thing. It's monotheism. It is kind of parallel to Judaism, but it's later than Judaism. It's pre-Islam. It's a Persian kind of thing. And it's, matter of fact, you'll hear some people say Christianity, Islam, and Judaism borrowed from Zoroastrianism. Not sure that's true. Zoroastrianism borrowed from Judaism, if anything, because Judaism was way earlier. But anyway, you have the Zend-Avesta and the Pahlavi texts. So here we go. The Dinidad are the religious laws and mythical tales. You hear that? Religious laws and mythical tales. The Vesprad are sacrificial litanies. The Yasna are sacrificial litanies and 5 hymns. So, and here it is. Here's from one. Like I said, I tried to pick lucid stuff. The first object of man is purity. Yazodah, purity, is for man. Next to life, the greatest good. Purity or uncleanness may be described as the state of a person or thing that is possessed of the demon, and the object of purification is to expel the demon. The principal means by which uncleanness enters a man is death, as death is a triumph of the demon. When a man dies, as soon as the soul has parted from the body, the dragnasu, or corpse drug, falls upon the dead from the religious regions of hell, and whoever thenceforth touches the corpse becomes unclean and makes unclean whomsoever he touches.
Whoa.
And it goes on and on and on and on. This was a revelation of science, right? Dr. Fauci wrote this. No, I'm just kidding. Sure sounds like it, right? The Buddhas are the creation myth. Bamanyas, the prophetical revelation, and I can't pronounce this. Sha'ast, Ayast, the laws. And here's from the creation myth. In the name of the creator Azamarzad, the Zakas, the Zand-knowing or tradition informed, which is the first about Amazad's original creation. And these are good translations, by the way. Antagonism of the evil spirit, and afterwards about the nature of the evil of the creatures from the original creation till the end, which is the future existence, the Tayui Pasono, as revealed by the religion of the Mazdaeans. So it is declared that Azmadad is supreme in omniscience and goodness, and unrivaled in splendor. The region of light is, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on.
What were these written in originally? Aramaic or?
This was written in something close to Aramaic. It's ancient Persian. So it's ancient Persian is often.
Like Farsi?
Oh, it's ancient. It's not modern. Hammurabi, Code of Hammurabi, I think, is written in the same language or similar language. But remember, languages change. I've done classes on language changing. Languages change, even English changed radically over time, if you have ever read some Anglo-Saxon and stuff like that. Anyway, okay, bibliographical tests. There are 4 manuscripts or fragments. 4. 4 is not too bad. I mean, there's a large gap between the earliest manuscript, possibly 600 BC, and the extant manuscripts 13 to 1700 BC. So it's a huge gap, very few manuscripts. It's not like the 24,000 New Testament, documents. It's not like the span of 200 years. We're talking, a large span, 600 BC to the extant manuscripts, 1300. And there's 4. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, or even the Old Testament has much better background. And there's another thing I'll mention in a little bit. Internal tests. Okay, anybody see internal contradictions? What's the problem with that whole thing? It's like you have to know there's a presumption, right? It's a presumption of understanding in myth cycle. So this is really, a lot of ancient religions are like that. For example, in the beginning it says, in the beginning, God, right? and with God, right? And it's like, okay, this is coherent, this is understandable, this is a creation account, and you get the whole thing, and you go, oh, I understand this. How'd you like the creation account that you found in Zoroastrianism? Ready to memorize that? I'm not even sure I can pronounce half the words of that. And there's a presumption of knowledge, right? That you have to know something to be able to even understand what they're writing about. So the works are not cohesive or comprehensible. The degree of witness, what? Somebody saw that? No, somebody just made it up. I mean, it's obviously that it's an account of a creation myth. When you start declaring something as God, you say, Amurzad is the supreme God. What did you just do? Well, if he's God, then let him declare himself God, right? I mean, you don't have to have, if you're having to tell somebody is God, because that God, what did the God of Abraham do? What did the God of Moses do? I'm God. I am, right? Not, my name is Amr Dimajad, or whatever the heck, I don't know what the name is, whatever his funny name is. These are tertiary, they're not every case. Geographically, there are some problems, because like it says Persian, but we don't know. We're not sure because the documents are so mangled in time. Chronologically, the unknown years separate the source from the author. We have no idea. The author is not claimed in any of these documents. The Pahlavi texts claim to be histories of creation, myth, and revelations. Matter of fact, I read part of one to you. In external tests, comparison of other works in the region of time, they have no support in time or place. Do you hear me? They have no support in time or place. In other words, there's no cohesiveness between other documents of similar time and place. So that there's no, if you're going to compare other documents, right, you have to have something to compare. If there's no history, for example, if it makes a claim of creation myth, but there's nothing to back the creation myth. For example, there is the two rivers, right? In the Old Testament, it claims about the Garden of Eden is between the two rivers, right? Euphrates and what's the other one? Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Well, wouldn't it be nice if in the Persian text they said it was created between the Tigris? It doesn't say that. As a matter of fact, in archaeology, it doesn't support the historical claims. It doesn't support any of the claims. There does support some of the ritual claims in Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. And remember, Zoroastrianism is the reason that we're base 60 for our time. Because, remember, I told you, in ancient cultures, you can count to 40 with 2 people. You got enough fingers and toes. So 40 days and 40 nights. If you got more than 40, it's way over, right? So if I count to 40, that means I can do 40s. If I have a priest added, I can do 60s. And so with the priest added, their culture was based in 60. And so that's where we get our 60 set. So it's pretty interesting that it comes out of Zoroastrianism. I don't know anybody who's Zoroastrian. There is Zoroastrianism around. It exists. Shintoism, kind of not next oldest. Japanese animism and pantheonic paganism. They have 2 texts, the Kojiki and the Nihonji. They were completed in 712 AD. Anybody see a problem with that? 712 AD is considered the modern period. It's not the ancient period. Myths, legends, and records of Japan from the earliest period, supposedly 1000 to 500 BC. The problem, the writing was not introduced in Japan until 284 AD. Anybody see a problem with this? Well, if it wasn't, you can't write it down because you can't write until then you better be remembered, right? Anyway, here it is, the beginning of heaven and earth. The names of the deities that were born in the plain of high heaven, when the heaven and the earth began, were the deity master of the august center of heaven. Next, the high august producing wondrous deity. Next, the divine producing wondrous deity. These 3 deities were all deities born alone and hid their persons. The names of the deities, and they hid their persons. Well, they hid their persons. How do you know they were even there? I'm just saying, the names of the deities that were born next from the thing that sprouted up into the reed shoot when the earth young and like and a flooding oil drifted about the Medusa-like were the pleasant reed shoot prince elder deity next to heavenly eternally standing deity. These two deities were likewise born alone and hid their persons. The 5 deities in the above list are separate heavenly deities. Okay, and it keeps going from there. So I've read all these documents, so you don't have to. You may if you wish. Go ahead. They'll put you to sleep. Chronicles of Japan completed 720 AD. Book 1 of Old Heaven and Earth were not yet separated, and the Yin and Yo were not yet divided. They formed a chaotic mass like an egg, which was obscurely defined limits and contained germs. The pure and clear part was thinly drawn out and formed heaven, while the heavier and the grosser elements settled down and became earth. And it goes on. This is a creation myth. Bibliographical about Shintoism. As for the error, Japanese mentioned by the commissioners, it may be permitted to observe that it was only introduced by an edict dated 1872. That is to say, just a fortnight before the publication of the report. And this era and its ascension is confidently placed 13 or 14 centuries before the first history, which records it was written. 9 centuries report the earliest computation. The art of writing was introduced into the country, and on the sole authority of Brooks, teeming with miraculous legends. Does such a proceeding need any comment after once being formulated in precise terms? And can any unprejudiced person continue to accept the early Japanese chronology and the first 1,000 years of the so-called history of Japan? That's from the translator of these documents in English. In other words, there's 14,000 years between the manuscript and the incidents, 500 years between the earliest possible. In other words, there's no writing. So these are, whatever. Yeah, these documents have really bad for internal contradictions. They are not cohesive. They are reasonably comprehensible. And what do I mean by that? You can understand them within their context, but they're myths. I mean, you can understand, for example, the myth of Zeus and Hera, right? I mean, that's comprehensible and cohesive. So they are to a degree. The degree of witness, they're tertiary, right? They got to be tertiary. The guy who wrote it down can only write in 284 AD, but he's writing about stuff that happened in 1000, so he saw it, right? Firsthand. No, he's not even a second-hand witness. He's a tertiary at best. So geographically, there's some problems geographically. Why? What was he writing introduced in Japan? Chinese. So Chinese writing written in Japanese, and the Japanese language changed. So you got another problem there. Basically a problem of translation geographically. Because how do you know it wasn't a Chinese myth that's reappropriated, which happens in a lot of cultures? Geographically, you know this, Romans, right? The Romans appropriated the Greek myth.
Yep.
And God. Chronologically, unknown years
Names and
separate.
likenesses have been changed
Yeah.
to protect the innocent.
To protect the innocent. The texts do claim to be histories. However, here's comparison with other works of ancient times. The Emperor Timmu, with his anxiety to amend the deviations from truth and the empty falsehoods of the historical documents, preserved by the various families and the author of the Chronicles of Japan, which is what we're talking about in English translation, with his elaborate system of fictitious dates, reoccur to our minds. And we ask ourselves to what extent similar garblings of history, sometimes unintentional, may have gone on during earlier ages, when there was even less check of them than there was in the 8th century. And therefore, the translator here gives expression to a few opinions founded chiefly on a careful study of the text of the records of ancient matters, helped out by a study of the Chronicles of Japan. He would be understood to do so with great diffidence, especially with regard to his few, so to speak, constructive remarks. As to the destructive side of the criticism, there need be less hesitation, for the old histories bear evidence too conclusively against themselves for it to be possible for the earlier portions of them, at least, to stand the test of sober investigation. This is from the translator. In other words, it's myth, right? There's no way this stuff can be, it claims to be history, but there's no way it can be history. Archaeology does not support the historical claims. They haven't found anything that's mentioned in the Chronicles of Japan from places to anything. There is some plate left. That's everything. So, okay, Shintoism. Indian. Hindu is Indian animism and pantheonic paganism. You're probably familiar with Hinduism or Hindu. They have the Vedas, the Upanishads, the laws of Manu, the laws of Arias, the institutes of Vishnu, the epics in the Vedanta. The Vedas, Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva. They're composed about, this is tradition, composed about 1500 BC, so 1,000 years after composition of the Old Testament. They're codified traditionally around 600 BC and written down. You hear that? They're composed 1500 BC, codified 600 BC, but written down about 300 BC. This is all tradition. When was the Old Testament written? According to Moses. It was written around 2000 BC, 2400 to 2000, 2500 BC. Okay? It was written then. That's the reason that the Greeks thought it was such a big deal. Cool stuff. Rig, hymns to various gods. Maybe I don't need to read these to you. Lord Angi, the chosen priest. I read a little bit. Priest, god, minister, sacrifice, the Hotar, lavishest of wealth. Worthy as Agni to be praised by living as ancient seers. He shall bring hitherward the gods. And these are like hymns. Like, we sing hymns, right, to our God and to Christ. So these are worship hymns. And yeah, that makes sense. It's cool. Hymns to various God are the Rig. Sama are hymns used by the priest during the Soma sacrifice. Soma sacrifice is a big deal in Hinduism. The Yajur Manual of Vedic Sacrificial Rites. The Soma sacrifice, hugely, I won't go into details, it's a religious kind of thing. And you can see the list of the different things in here. The Manual of Vedic Sacrificial Rites, the Soma sacrifice. These are just rituals and information on a ritual. Atharva contains material from the Rig Veda plus numerous incantations and metaphysical texts. They're written down about 200 BC, traditionally composed about 1000 BC, but not written down until 200 BC. Their charms to cure diseases and possession by demons of disease. Cool. Charm against Takman, fever, and related diseases. And, you can read this. They're basically incantations, etc., etc. There are many, as 149 of these Upanishads about, different charms and things. Traditionally, some is ancient as 600 BC, known date as late as 1000 AD. And here's a list of them. And here's, let a man meditate on the syllable Om, called, and if you ever want to Om went, Om, called the Udgatha. For the Udgatha, a portion of the Samaveda is sung beginning with Om. A full count of Om is this. The essence of all beings is the earth. The essence of the earth is water. The essence of water, the plants. The essence of plants, man. The essence of man's speech. The essence of speech, the Rig Veda. The essence of the Rig Veda, the Samaveda. I don't think science supports this, but that's okay. The Manu, the Adam of the Hindus, collection of laws from Manu. Great sages, okay, Manu is Abraham, or Adam. But the great sages approached Manu. Is there a problem there? Anyway, the great sages approached Manu, was seated with a collected mind, and having duly worshipped him, spoke as follows. Divine One, to declare us precisely and to order the sacred laws of each of the four chief castes, Varna of the immediate ones, etc., etc., etc. So these are where the laws, basically the laws come from. Manu, Adam of the Hindus. I'm not making fun of it. It's just interesting that the Adam of the Hindus is still around so the sages can come talk to him. These are the Hindu law books written by the sages, etc., etc., in the first millennium. So they wrote these during the first millennium BC. Now, therefore, declare the acts. So these are our laws. These are the laws that were made. The laws, okay. The important thing about this is the authority is the agreement of those who know the law. And the authorities of the latter are the Vedas alone. Who gave the law in the Torah? Who gave the laws to Manu and to the Hindus? The Vedas. Who wrote the Vedas? Somebody did. The sages or someone wrote the laws in the Vedas. Do you see the problem here? The laws, it's like Hammurabi. Who wrote Hammurabi's code?
Hopefully Hammurabi did.
Hammurabi. Well, did he get it from God? No, he got it. I read you the thing from it. It says he did it apart from God. He did it as it was a social idea, a social construct, an idea from his mind to improve things. Okay, which God? Which God do you want to pick? How many gods are there in Hinduism? There's thousands. There may be even millions. We don't know. There's one God that wants you to kill other people. So he would have said, thou shalt not kill, right? He would say, thou shalt kill other people. Just saying. You know, they're actually, the Bhagavad Gita is about sex. Isn't it the Bhagavad Gita? Anyway, one is about sex. So, anyway, the Vishnu, denied the Brahman being over the god, and the god sprung from the lotus. Having woke from his slumber, Vishnu proposing to create living beings and perceiving the earth covered with water, assumed the shape of a boar, delighting to sport in the water at the beginning of each former kalpa, and raised up the earth from the water. His feet were the Vedas. His tusks the sacrificial stakes. In his teeth were the offerings. His mouth was the pyre. His tongue was the fire. His hair was the sacrificial grass. The sacred texts were his head. And he was endowed with the miraculous power of great ascetic. The problem with the sacred text being his head is if he's doing the creation, they weren't written down until about 200 BC. So he's got a problem there, right? The world wasn't created until 200 BC, just saying, according to Vishnu. These attributed to the sage Vasa, written down from legends of the Bharat. You know, they got a lot of Sanskrit texts. These are all Sanskrit texts written down in the 1st century. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1. What did my people and the Pavadas do, O Saga, when they assembled together in the holy field of Kurukshetra, desirous to do battle? Seeing the army of the Pavadans drawn in battle array, the prince Duryodhana approached the preceptor and spoke these words. O preceptor, observe this grand army of the sons of Pet. Basically, he has the appearance of one of the chief gods, I can't remember which one it was, as his carriage, as his driver of his carriage. And basically, the carriage driver suggested he should kill his uncles and cousins and relations because of karma. That's the lesson of the Bhagavad Gita, that you should kill your relatives if they oppose you in karma. Verse of Veda, I can read this, so just skip this. Okay, bibliographical tests. Manuscripts are available. The chief problem is accurate transmission. There are many versions, none authoritative. Remember, I told you this was supposedly composed around 1000 BC. They were perfected 600 BC, but not written down to about 200 BC. So guess what? Somebody's passing, it's not passed on scripts of paper. It's not passed on iPhones. It's passed word of mouth. So how do you know? This is a problem. Scribe class did not develop similar to the Hebrew culture. They had a caste system that could not support this. You know the caste system, right? Okay, caste system, the Brahmins at the top, and the bottom are the unclean, the unmentionable. You know, the ones who do the sewer work. And so the caste system did not support, it could not support a scribe class. Remember how we talked about scribe class is very important to the passing of documents. So, for example, in the Old Testament, why do we have so many good copies? And why do we even have copies in the Septuagint and in the Dead Sea Scrolls? The reason we have those copies is because scribe class were trying to accurately pass those documents. It's also the reason we don't have as many documents as we like, right? What did they do to the documents when they copied them? They destroyed it, right? So they made a copy. The copy was confirmed, good, and then they destroyed the old copy, which is a problem for us. But there's a large gap between the earliest manuscript and the extant manuscripts. There's problems are similar to the Old Testament books, except no scribes and little commonality. When you find the manuscripts for any of these things, you're going to find huge differences between the manuscripts. That's a problem. Historically not important in Hindu theology. Historicity is not important in Hindu theology because the world is viewed as unchanging. This is a problem with Hindu philosophy and ideology. And by the way, how many new drugs and new machines and new stuff come out of India? You know why? If the world is viewed as unchanging, then what are you going to make? Right? I mean, we've always used a Brahmin bull or a bull to turn the thing. We've always had the caste system. We've always done it this way. Why would we change? Right? Why would you change? Well, maybe because you have like 1 billion people living in your country, you need to have more efficient ways of making food. But that's a whole other problem, right? Because in the system of Hinduism, I just mentioned this, we're not talking about religion, but they believe in the soul is reincarnated into another thing. So if you die, you're just reincarnated. Now maybe you become a gnat, maybe you become a god. If you become a god, that's bad. Because you don't get reincarnated, you don't die. Gods are immortal. So you don't want to be reincarnated as a god. I have a big problem with that. I can't prove any of that, but that's okay. The problem with that Hindu text, many internal contradictions. They are not cohesive, and many of them are not comprehensible. What's the problem with comprehensibility? They may have been comprehensible to a Brahmin in 200 BC, or even 1000 BC. But what happens when you get to 200 BC? The language has changed significantly. The stuff has changed significantly. Even though they believe in an unchanging world, guess what? The world has changed significantly from 1000 BC to 200 BC. So guess what? They're incomprehensible because of time. Which is very interesting because when we looked at the Old Testament text of the Torah, were they comprehensible? They were understandable, even within the context of history. So this is interesting, isn't it? Just saying, this is what we see in a lot of ancient religious documents. The degree of witness, there is no degree of witness. Some of them claim to be first-hand accounts, but they can't be first-hand accounts. It's impossible, right? Geographically, there's some problems. Because why is there geographically some problems? India is huge, and what's on the other side of India? Well, you got Persia, you have China. What happens when you get cultural influx of information? So you don't know chronologically where the information or geographically even where it came from. You know, it's the claim of Zoroastrianism, right? Zoroastrianism says, oh, it may have affected Judaism or Christianity or Islam, right? But maybe not. Christianity may have, or Judaism probably affected Zoroastrianism because it came first. So it's kind of funny to make these claims sometimes because chronologically you have these issues and geographically. None of the documents claim to be histories, by the way. None, do you hear me what I said? None of the documents claim to be histories, even the Vedas and the epics. They claim to be like the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Odyssey because they have mythical structure. They have, Athena coming down, well, not quite Athena, but the equivalent. You have Vishnu coming down to talk to the guy, right? And acting against and with him and other gods fighting in battles. So it's, they're epics. They have hymns, they have spells. External tests, comparison to other works of ancient times. Since the works are not histories, can you compare them to other works in history? Nope, can't do it. So you can't make those comparisons. Archaeology does not support historical claims. None of the places, like for example, the place where Vishnu was supposedly fought the battle in the Bhagavad Gita, doesn't exist. Places, we'll see this in the Book of Mormonism too. There are no places in history that match the places that are in any of these epics or Vedas. It does not support the historical claims. It does support the ritual claims in there. Hinduism and Hindu scripture is the basis for Buddhism, Taoism, Shaivism, and Sikhism, which we'll look quickly at. Buddhism. You have Buddhist sutras, you have the Vinaya texts, which, by the way, if you remember, those were also the texts you find in Hinduism, and the Lotus Sutra, which I mentioned before. The Book of the Great Decrease, Buddhist Gospel, Foundation of the Kingdom of Righteousness, the discussion of knowledge of three Vedas, if he should desire. These are arguments in the early Buddhist mysticism. The Treatise of Barrenness and Bondage, the Legend of the Great King of Glory. If you notice, some of these are Hindu texts as well. The Book of the Great Decrease, the Sutana. It's the only history in the Buddhistic sutras. Passing out of the state between conscious, this is history. Passing out of the state between conscious and unconscious, he fell into a state in which the consciousness, both of sensations and of ideas, had wholly passed away. Then the Venerable Ananda said to the Venerable Anurmada, O my Lord, O Anurubha, the Blessed One is dead. Nay, brother Ananda, the Blessed One is not dead. He has entered into that state which both sensations and ideas have ceased to be. He's dead. Those 500 brethren arranged their robes on one shoulder, and bowing down, the clasped hands in the thrice walked reverently around the pile, and the bowed down in reverence at the feet of the Blessed One, and then the homage. This is basically the death of Buddha. These are the, and I'll talk about that in a second. Here's different, these are the suttas, the kanadas, the patha, the regulations, outward life by the members of the Buddhist monks. There are these in Christianity too. The Apostolic Fathers wrote about that. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Is there any archaeological evidence that Buddha existed?
I'll get to that in just a second. The Lotus Sutra. Now at that time it was the Lord surrounded, attended, honored, revered, venerated, worshipped by the four classes of hearers. After expounding the Dhammapada, called the Great Exposition, a text of great development, serving to instruct bodhisattvas and proper to all Buddhas, sat cross-legged on the seat of the law and entered upon the meditation termed the station of the exposition of infinity. His body was motionless, his mind had reached perfect tranquility. As soon as the Lord entered upon his meditation, there fell a great rain of divine flowers. Mandaravasa, a great Mandarasa, Mandasakas, a great Mandasakas, covering the Lord of the four classes of heavens, while the whole Buddha field shook in 6 ways. It moved, removed, trembled from one end to the other, tossed, on, etc., etc. The Lotus Sutra does not claim to be a history. It is a divine revelation. Okay, here you go. Here's the information you want. Siddhartha Gautama lived about 623 BC. Traditionally, this is traditional, 623 to 543 BC. Many manuscripts and fragments are available. The earliest manuscript is believed to be written about 450 BC. That's 100 years after his death. But there is no record until 250 AD. So in other words, do we have a witness to the Buddha? No, we don't. We don't even know historically if he existed. The earliest manuscripts are from 200 to 500 AD, nearly 600 years from the time of Buddha. The earliest claim is 100 years after he was dead. So it's not like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, where Matthew and John say, I saw him. Paul says, I saw him. These people lived in the time of Jesus, right? And Moses said, I saw these things. He was there. He was a witness to them. In this case, we have no witness. There is no witness to this at all. We don't even know if it's the right Buddha. There are multiple Buddhas claimed in history. This is the most classic one, this guy, Siddhartha. The Buddha is an internal test. There are internal contradictions. The works are generally cohesive. Okay. I know you don't think so, but read them. They are generally cohesive. They're reasonably comprehensible-ish. The degree of witness, there's tertiary none in every case. There are none. Geographically, there are problems with this text. We don't even know where the guy came from. We don't even know what area in India he came from, or even if he came from India. There's some claims that he came from other places, you know. Chronologically, unknown years separate the source from the author, and as described, some texts claim to be histories, some do. And so you do the external test, right? You go to your external test in comparison with other works, okay? In opposition to Silvana, the tradition goes on to relate there came forward one of the most distinguished and oldest of Buddhist disciples, the great Kaspa, who proposed that 500 of the most eminent members of the community should assemble in Raga, the royal residence of the ruler of Magda, in order to collect the master's precepts in an authentic form. It's already been said above how during the 7-month sitting of the assembly, Kaspa as president fixed the Vinaya with the assistance of Upali and the Dhamma with the assistance of Ananda. This is a story that's come down to us. What we have here before is not history, but pure invention. This is a quote from Buddhistic scholars. And moreover, an invention of no very recent date. Apart from the internal reasons that might be adduced to support this, we are able to prove it by comparing another text which is older than this story and the author which cannot have yet known it. I allude to the highly important Sutta, which gives an account of the death of Buddha, and the Pali text, which has recently been printed by Professor Childers. Translator's notes. In other words, I have documents in time that contradict what the Buddhist text said, the historical text said. This is a perfect example of contradictions in historical texts, where I have texts that I can compare. The point of this is the group got together to make a story. Now, this is what Brown said about Christianity, right? Is there any historical source for that happening? No, not unless he concludes that the Nicene, when they got together at Nicaea to talk about, the Nicene Creed and other things, that they were conniving, right? But there's no documental evidence that they were. This is documental evidence right on the sutras that they got together. They got together to do what? To fix the story. Just like, remember in Shintoism, the Emperor of Japan? Yeah, we need to fix this, right? It's all messed up. So they fixed it. Okay. Dan Brown says that that's what they did with the New Testament. There's no evidence at all. Because guess what? What do people do in the ancient world when they write stuff down? They write it down. They don't hide it. You think that they don't have any reason to hide it? They just write stuff down. Like these guys did. They had no idea. Okay, now the people who are I don't respect the Buddhist belief because I think it's paganism, but that's okay. They believe what they want to believe, but they'll die without Jesus. I'm sorry. That's the way the world is. I'm sorry. We need to bring them enlightenment. And you won't find it in these texts. They're made up. So if they actually read them, and by the way, why don't they read them?
Incomprehensible?
Well, they can't. Most of the people in India are illiterate, and those that are literate are Brahmin, higher class people, and they're the ones running the rig. If you run the rig, you don't want the people, like it's the lottery. You don't want kids to know how bad the lottery is for, math, so you don't teach them math. I wouldn't either, because they won't spend money on the lottery if you did. Archaeology does not support the historical claims. There is no historical evidence to support Buddha. In Jainism, what's his name was a Jainist? The famous pacifist.
Hare Krishna?
No, the very famous Mahatma Gandhi.
Oh.
Mahatma Gandhi was a Jainist. Jainists, they protect insects. I won't get into the religious beliefs. They have 2 sutras. Here's a sutra, 599 to 527 BC, possibly this time, but it was written down after 100 AD. And you can read it. It's similar to what text we've seen before. There's nothing new in it. The Kalpa Sutra, the lives of Gyas, the life of Maharavi. You may have heard of Maharavi. They're written after 100 AD. These events happened in 500 BC, supposedly, so there's no way that anyone could see them. They're lectures. They're purported lectures. The Jain Canonical Literature, bibliographical. The canonical literature was originally composed, but later in Sanskrit because it's the principal medium. There's a lot of variation on what constitutes the original Jainist literature. For several centuries, even the monks themselves did not have a common agreement on this subject. The whole literature came down to its present format much after the passing away of Maharavi. The works, therefore, do not guarantee the purity of his teachings or Jainist. And this is a quote from Jainist teaching. So I said this is a quote. This is what they say. You ever seen something from the Lutheran, Missouri Synod of Lutherans that say, we're not sure about the actual Old Testament and New Testament, we just want to warn you. You know, it's a trigger warning, right? We'll give you a trigger warning. This is a trigger warning. It's right in John's teaching. The reason, why is this true? I mean, this should be obviously why it's true. Why it's true of Buddhism, too, and Hinduism.
Based on faith.
Yeah, it's not based in history. It's based on what you think, right? And if I think the world is green, if I think that the moon is green or the moon is made out of cheese, then it's what I think. It doesn't matter what you tell me. It matters only what I think. And so, yeah, these are based in philosophy and ideology.
Isn't that kind of what you were telling us and I can't remember what the school was in 1883.
Tübingen School. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of what they were starting to say?
Yes. That's what they were saying in Christianity, which is why they are a heretic. It's a heretical movement in Christianity. John's text, internal contradictions, the works are not cohesive. They are somewhat incomprehensible. You read them yourself, you can tell. I gave you some examples. The degree of witness, there's tertiary none. There is no direct eyewitness or secondary witness to this stuff. Geographically, there are problems. Chronologically, the unknown nearest source, separate the source and the author. The texts do claim to be histories. They're, kind of like Socratic documents. In external tests, comparison with other works, they're a real problem. There are no works to compare. And there's no reliable historical literature extant in that period. It's a problem. Archaeology does not support any historical claims. Historical evidence does not support that Maharabi ever existed. It's a problem you got in Buddhism. We don't know if Buddha existed. We don't know if Maharabi existed. Maharabi is the prophet of Jainism. Sikhism, 400 AD monotheistic derivation of Hinduism. Anybody see a problem already? It's modern. It's modern. It has nothing to do with ancient literature. They have a Shari guru. They have gurus. Collected writings of the 6 Sikh gurus and hymns. I won't read them to you. They're similar to what we've seen. Not a whole lot of difference. There are many manuscripts available. They believe they have a definitive version. They're not sure, but it's modern literature. What do you do with that? The documents make no historical claims, so that's cool. You don't claim to be historical, you can write anything you want. Degree of witness, there's a significant internal contradictions. Work is not entirely cohesive or comprehensible. It's really similar to the stuff we saw in the Vedas. Degree of witness, none. There's none. Geographically placed, they are chronologically placed. They do not claim to be history. Comparison with other works. The work is not history. You can't do these comparisons. The archaeology does support ritual claims, but it's from 1400, for goodness sake. 1400. I mean, Prince of France. Okay, I know Prince of France was around, right? Yeah, anyway. Confucianism. Yeah.
The Gutenberg Bible was coming up.
Bingo, yeah. Confucianism. Chinese spiritualism and philosophy is not a religion. The I Ching, the Shu Ching, the Shi Ching. The I Ching, Shu Ching, Shi Ching, I Ching, Yu Ching. Sorry. I don't mean to make fun, but it's funny, right? Confucian analytics, the Mencius and the Hisho Ching. The Book of Changes, okay, these are the hexagrams. Look at the time period. This is getting, they could be as old as 500 BC, but they didn't have writing in 500 BC. So you got issues. They did have writing in this period, traditionally written around 300 BC during this emperor. Confucian period is 450 to 350 BC. And Confucius literature says it was written 1200 BC. But if Confucius lived from 450 to 350, you got a real problem here, right? It's obviously copied stuff.
Well, how can you have a tradition going back to 3,000 or 5,000 if he didn't exist?
Well, it probably exists, but remember, it's not religion. Confucianism is not religion. It's philosophy. The Book of Historical Records describes dates, events written down during the Han Dynasty, mutilated, fragmented conditions said to exist at the time of Confucius. A collection of historical memorials, the Book of Thang, etc., etc. There's some quotes here. the Book of Odes, poems, fragments. We got fragments of poems. Confucius, traditionally 551 BC to 478 BC, 9 BC. The Analects, written down 70 years after Confucius' death. Written down 70 years after his death. Any witnesses? Well, if the kid was like 2, right? Maybe. 2 years old. Mencus, traditionally in this period, he's the principal interpreter of Confucianism. We know about him. He exists. He wrote some stuff. The Book of Filial Piety, there's 2 surviving manuscripts, fragmentary texts. It was recommended by Confucius. There's one of few that survived during 200 BC book burning. They burned them all. Earliest manuscript is 713 to 755, and they describe events in 500 BC. So in other words, the manuscripts are fragmentary and fluid. The time between the events manuscripts vary. Some are years between. Most of them can't be histories. It could, if they're histories, they're what do you call it? Passed down verbally. Time significant difference between the manuscripts and the originals. In other words, we don't have any primary. No significant contradictions. Works are cohesive. Some are somewhat incomprehensible. The degree of witness, they claim to be primary, secondary, and tertiary, or none. It varies by the document. They are geographically placed, they are chronologically placed, but there are issues with it that we've mentioned. When I say primary, secondary, and tertiary, if a person wrote down the hymns, it's kind of like Paul writing down his letters, right? Or someone writing hymns in the early period. It's cool. Some texts claim to be histories. Comparison with other works? Okay, you got to compare these works with each other because they're the only thing extant in that period. There's no other historical literature. The archaeology does support historical claims. Historical evidence does support Confucius. But Confucianism does not claim to be a religion. This is very important. Taoism, Tao Ching, written by Lao Tzu, may predate Lao Tzu. He was writing down information. The earliest known manuscript is 300 BC. Many manuscripts are available. There's fragments. There's earliest complete is 150 BC. And about 200 years between the earliest and original. The documents are not historical. Taoism, there are acceptable internal differences. They're not cohesive or comprehensible. Primary by attribution, because one guy wrote it, geographically placed chronologically. If Lao Tzu is not the originator, an unknown number of years separate them, and the document is not history. External test, comparison to other works. Since works are not history, you can't compare them. And archaeology does generally support historical claims, does support the ritual claims. And I think we ran out of time. Well, is it okay we finish this up and then go back to literature of John? Is this okay? Is this informative and important information to you? Like I said, I'm not making fun of the religions. We're looking at the documents. Yes, ma'am.
There's a big temple just south of, on Greenwich. I don't know if it's Buddhist, Hindu, I
I
don't
think it is Hindu,
know. Okay.
yeah.
No.
It's Greenwich.
South Bonnie,
Yeah, South
it's
Bonnie.
South Bonnie.
I don't think it's Hindu. I think
No.
it's, I believe it's Buddhist. Because my massage therapist is Buddhist, and she says she doesn't go to the temple.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father, for your word. Pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray.
Amen.
Did your range roll running?
No, I think you're right.
Until the weather warms up.